Okay, so picture this. You're in a crowd of like 300,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah, so many people all crammed together feeling that, like, energy.
Yeah.
It's exhilarating, right. But hold on a sec.
Yeah.
Imagine for a second, you're the one who's got to make sure all those people stay safe.
Oh, wow.
That's crowd management.
Yeah.
And let me tell you,
Yeah.
it's way more complicated than you might think.
Right.
So in this deep dive, we're going to explore something called INCROWD.
Oh, interesting.
It's a research framework,
Okay.
and it's helping experts use all sorts of technology and psychology
Wow.
to keep things running smoothly, even when you've got tons of people packed into one place.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty amazing stuff.
It really is a fascinating field. It's this mix of meticulous planning,
Uh-huh.
but then also having to make split-second decisions in real time.
Right, right.
What's super interesting to me is that it often involves a whole team of people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you've got event organizers, security, local authorities,
Oh, yeah.
but then you also have these experts who can actually simulate how crowds behave.
Crowd simulation. Is that like something out of a movie or?
It might sound like sci-fi, but I'm telling you, it's actually crucial for planning these big events.
So they can like see how people will move through a space before it even happens.
Exactly. And by doing these simulations, organizers can spot those potential trouble areas, like bottlenecks,
Right.
and they can actually test out different strategies for managing all that foot traffic.
So it's like a virtual dress rehearsal for the crowd.
You got it. And this kind of super detailed planning,
Yeah.
it's essential for any large event,
I vote.
whether it's a concert, a festival, you name it,
That makes sense.
even sporting events.
So this research paper that we're looking at today,
Okay.
it focuses on this really cool event called the World Living Statues Festival.
Oh, yeah.
It's in Arnhem, Netherlands.
I've heard of that.
And get this, it draws over 300,000 people every year.
Wow. That's a lot of statues.
It is.
And a lot of people to manage.
Exactly. And this is where this INCROWD framework comes into play.
Okay.
So INCROWD, it's like a blueprint for creating a system that doesn't just react to problems.
Right.
It actually tries to monitor and predict how the crowd will behave so you can be one step ahead.
Be proactive.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just about having security guards on hand.
Right.
It's about using technology and data to sort of see potential issues before they even happen.
Exactly. You're thinking ahead.
Yeah.
And in Crowd, it breaks down this whole process into 4 key parts.
Okay.
The first one is crowd interaction.
Crowd interaction, okay?
And this is all about how the system gathers information about the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking cameras, microphones, and even sensors that can pick up data from people's smartphones.
Wait, so they're using our phones to monitor the crowd?
Not in a way that identifies individuals or anything like that,
Right.
but they can collect data about things like how dense the crowd is and how people are moving around.
Right.
So for example, let's say a bunch of people suddenly start moving away from a certain area.
Okay.
That could be a sign that something's wrong.
Yeah, I can see that. So what happens to all that data?
That's where the second part comes in. Mining.
Mining.
Yeah, it's all about making sense of this mountain of data that's coming in from those different sources.
Uh-huh.
And they use these sophisticated algorithms and data mining techniques to look for patterns and trends.
So they're using computers to analyze the data and basically look for red flags.
Yes, but human expertise is still super important here.
Oh, I bet.
Crowd behavior, it's complex, right?
Yeah.
Algorithms can only go so far.
Right.
So you still need those experienced crowd managers to interpret the data, look at security reports, and make judgments based on, their years of experience.
So it's like a blend of technology and human intuition.
Exactly. You need both.
So once they've got all that data analyzed,
Right.
What's next?
The next step is predicting.
Predicting, okay?
So this is where they try to figure out what the crowd might do next.
So they're kind of like a crowd whisperer, like they're trying to understand the collective mood
Yeah.
and predict how it might shift.
That's a great way to put it.
Cool.
So this prediction, it can be something as simple as an experienced crowd manager,
Uh-huh.
just, thinking through different scenarios in their head.
Okay.
Or it can be super complex, like using computer models to crunch real-time data
Oh, wow.
and forecast how the crowd might move.
So it sounds like it's a combination of art and science.
It really is.
That's amazing.
And this brings us to the final part, decision-making.
Okay, so this is where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. This is where all that data, the analysis, the predictions, all of it comes together.
Uh-huh.
And they use it to make decisions about what actions to take.
So they might decide to open another exit or deploy more security, or maybe even make announcements to the crowd.
Exactly. Those are all possibilities.
Interesting.
And a lot of times they use a scenario-based approach. Scenario-based.
Yeah, so think of it like a playbook.
Uh-huh.
They have these predefined scenarios.
Okay.
Like, let's say there's overcrowding near the stage.
Right.
And each scenario is linked to specific things they can do.
Okay.
So for that overcrowding scenario, they might close off that area,
Right.
redirect people to different exits, or maybe even adjust the lighting or the sound to try and influence the crowd's behavior.
It sounds like a carefully choreographed dance,
It really is.
guiding the crowd safely through the event.
That's a great way to think about it.
So bringing it back to that Arnhem Festival,
Yeah.
are they actually using this in-crowd framework there?
Imagine their control room, right?
Okay.
It's buzzing with activity.
Uh-huh.
They've got screens everywhere displaying live feeds from cameras all over the festival grounds.
Wow.
They might be using data from Wi-Fi hotspots to track how people are moving,
Okay.
or even looking at social media posts to gauge the overall mood of the crowd.
Oh, that's interesting.
And all of this information.
Yeah. It's feeding into this in-crowd system,
Right.
and it helps the experts make those informed decisions in real time.
So basically, all this amazing technology is working behind the scenes
Yeah.
to keep everyone safe.
That's the goal.
So this technology, I mean, it sounds so advanced.
Yeah.
Why isn't it being used everywhere?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to one of the most surprising things we found in this research paper.
Oh, okay. Lay it on me.
Most of these, really sophisticated crowd models,
Yeah.
they're not actually ready for widespread use.
Hold on. I thought we were talking about cutting-edge technology.
Yeah.
What's the holdup?
Well, it turns out that building these really accurate and reliable crowd models,
Uh-huh.
it's insanely difficult.
Oh, okay.
Even with all the data and computing power we have.
Mm.
You see, at the end of the day, crowd behavior,
Yeah.
it's driven by human beings.
Right.
And humans, well, we're inherently unpredictable. So even with all the sensors and algorithms in the world, you can never be 100% certain about how people will react.
So there's always an element of uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm starting to see how challenging this is.
Yeah, it's really complex.
But where do we go from here?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
That's good.
We'll delve into those hurdles and what researchers are doing to overcome them.
I'm looking forward to it.
Should be interesting.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff.
It really is.
Okay, so we'll pick this up in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. So before we got sidetracked, you were asking about these advanced crowd management systems.
Oh, yeah. It really surprised me that these models aren't quite ready for prime time yet.
Right. It does make you wonder what kind of roadblocks they're hitting.
It's like we're so close to a major breakthrough, but there's just something holding us back.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's like having all the puzzle pieces,
Yeah?
but just not being able to quite fit them together just yet. And one of the biggest challenges, honestly, is just how complex people are.
Yeah, I mean, even with all the fancy data and algorithms you have, you
Right.
can't really truly predict how people are going to react in any given situation.
You just can't. And imagine trying to program a computer
Oh, my God.
to understand things like social interaction and group dynamics,
Right.
and even emotional contagion. It's a huge task.
Emotional contagion. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. Think about a time when you were in a crowd and the energy just suddenly shifted.
Yeah.
Maybe everyone started cheering out of nowhere, or maybe there was this ripple of panic that went through everyone.
I've definitely felt that. It's like the mood just becomes contagious.
Exactly. Emotions can spread through a crowd like wildfire.
Wow.
And they can have a huge impact on how people behave, often in ways that are, totally unpredictable.
So how on earth do you even begin to account for that in a crowd model?
That is one of the biggest questions researchers are wrestling with.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the limitations of relying solely on those algorithms and data.
Uh-huh.
We need to go deeper, really understand those psychological and social factors at play.
So it's not just about crunching numbers.
No.
You need insights from psychology, from sociology,
For sure.
maybe even anthropology.
Absolutely. And this is where those 3 types of crowd models that we talked about earlier,
Right.
they each bring something different to the table.
Okay. Yeah, we talked about mental models, theoretical models, and computational models.
Oh, right.
We break those down a bit more, starting with those mental models.
Sure.
They rely on the expertise of those seasoned crowd managers, right?
Exactly. Those folks who have years of experience observing crowds and they've learned to anticipate how they move and how to respond effectively.
Yeah.
They have this almost intuitive understanding of crowd dynamics.
It's like they can read the crowd's energy and know what's going to happen next.
That's a great way to put it.
But how do you capture that kind of expertise? It seems so intangible.
It is a challenge, but one way is to actually just talk to these experts.
Okay.
Ask them to describe how they think, how they approach different scenarios.
So you try and take that like gut feeling and turn it into something concrete.
Exactly. And researchers are also using simulations,
Okay.
even virtual reality, to try and capture these mental models.
Wow. So they can like create a virtual crowd and see how those experts react.
That's the idea.
That's amazing. It's like a training ground for crowd management.
Exactly.
What about theoretical models? Where do those fit in?
Theoretical models, they draw on research from fields like social psychology and sociology,
Okay.
and they try to explain the why behind crowd behavior.
So they're looking at the crowd as this kind of social organism
Yes,
that has its own rules and patterns?
precisely. And these models look at things like group identity, social norms,
Yeah.
and how individuals influence each other within a crowd.
You know, it's interesting because we talk about crowds like they're this single entity.
Yeah.
But in reality, they're made up of all these individuals,
Right.
each with their own thoughts and motivations and behaviors.
And that's a really important point, and it's something that these theoretical models are trying to capture.
Okay.
For example, one well-known theory suggests that crowds tend to move towards a common emotional state.
Oh, interesting.
So if a couple of people start to panic, that panic can easily spread to everyone else.
Like that emotional contagion we were talking about before.
Exactly, and understanding this is super valuable for crowd managers.
Yeah, it makes you think about those crowd surges that happen at concerts.
Right.
If you can understand what causes them,
Yeah,
maybe you can stop them from happening in the first place.
that's the ultimate goal, and that's where computational models come in.
Okay, those are the ones that use like math and computers, right?
Yes, they use mathematical equations and computer programs
Right.
to simulate crowd behavior.
So they're basically creating virtual crowds
Yeah.
that behave like real ones.
Exactly. And these models can get super complicated.
Oh, I bet.
They factor in things like crowd density, individual movement patterns,
Mhm.
and even environmental things like the layout of the space or the weather.
It's like building a digital twin of a real crowd.
I like that. It really is.
And these models are getting more and more sophisticated.
They really are.
Some of them can even incorporate those mental models and theoretical models.
Yes, they can combine the intuition of experts with the analytical power of computers.
Wow.
It's a very multidisciplinary approach.
That's amazing. You know, it's funny to think about those early crowd simulations.
Yeah.
They were probably pretty basic, just like little dots moving around on a screen.
Yeah, very simple.
And now we're talking about simulations that can create individual avatars with unique characteristics and behaviors.
That's right. It's getting closer and closer to the real thing.
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps in making these models even more accurate and reliable?
That's the million-dollar question, and that brings us to what researchers are focused on right now, tackling those key challenges that are
Right.
preventing these models from actually being used out there in the real world.
So what are those challenges?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is just getting enough good data.
Data collection. Why is that so difficult?
You need tons and tons of data to train these models and make sure they're accurate. And it can't just be any data. It has to be high quality. It has to accurately reflect how real crowds actually behave.
Right.
So think back to that Arnhem Festival,
Okay.
trying to collect data from 300,000 people all moving around this relatively small space.
Yeah.
It's a logistical
It
nightmare.
would be like trying to track a swarm of bees.
That's a great analogy.
Where do you even start?
You need a really complex network of sensors and data collection systems.
Yeah.
And it's not just about how much data you have, it's about the quality of that data.
Okay.
It has to be detailed enough to capture those individual movements and interactions.
Right. I can also imagine that this raises some privacy concerns.
Definitely.
People might not be happy about being constantly monitored.
You're absolutely right. And that's why figuring out how to collect this data ethically and responsibly
Yeah.
is absolutely crucial.
So how do they address that?
It's a tough balance, but researchers are looking at ways to anonymize that data.
Okay.
So you can't identify individual people.
Right.
And they're also working on algorithms that can analyze data without compromising anyone's privacy.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, so data collection is one challenge. But another big one is the complexity of the algorithms themselves.
Right, because we're talking about really complex systems here,
We are.
and the algorithms need to be able to handle that complexity.
They do. It's like trying to program a computer to understand human nature.
Oh, yeah.
But it's even more than that. It's about understanding how that human nature plays out in the specific context of a crowd.
So these algorithms need to be able to adapt
Yes.
to different types of crowds.
Right.
Different environments, different cultures even.
Exactly. A crowd at a rock concert is going to be totally different from a crowd at a religious festival.
Yeah, totally.
And a crowd in Tokyo might act differently from a crowd in Rio.
Absolutely.
These algorithms have to be sensitive to those nuances.
So where do we stand right now with developing these algorithms?
Well, researchers are making good progress,
Hmm.
but there's still a long way to go, and one really promising area is artificial intelligence.
AI. Okay, I've heard a lot about that. How is it being applied to crowd management?
So, machine learning algorithms, which are a part of AI,
Okay.
they're really good at finding patterns in huge amounts of data.
Okay.
So you can train them on tons of crowd data to help them identify patterns of movement, patterns of behavior,
Right.
even those patterns of emotional contagion.
So they can learn from past events to predict what might happen in the future.
Exactly. And the more data these algorithms see, the better they get at making predictions.
It's almost like they're developing their own intuition about crowd behavior.
I love that analogy. And that's really the power of AI. It's not just about processing numbers. It's
Yeah.
about building systems that can learn and adapt, just like people can.
This is all incredibly fascinating, but I have to say,
Yeah.
it also makes me think about the implications for our privacy and our freedom.
I think those are totally valid concerns.
Yeah.
And it's super important that we have those open and honest conversations about the ethics of these technologies.
Absolutely. We don't want to end up in a world where our every move is being tracked and analyzed.
Right. It's about finding that balance between innovation and responsibility.
So we've talked about the data collection challenges and the algorithm development.
Yeah.
Are there any other major hurdles?
Yes. One last one I want to touch on
Yeah.
is the need for better communication and collaboration
Okay.
between the researchers who are developing these models
Right.
and the practitioners who are actually out there managing crowds.
Right. So the people building the tools and the people using them need to be on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes there's a disconnect between that cutting edge research
Yeah.
and the practical needs of crowd managers in real life situations.
I can see that. Like, the researchers might be focused on building the fanciest algorithm,
Yeah,
but the practitioners are dealing with real-world problems that the algorithm might not solve.
exactly. And that just highlights how important it is to have more dialogue,
Yeah.
more collaboration, more sharing of knowledge between those two groups.
So it's not just about building amazing technology, it's about making sure it's actually useful in the real world.
That's it. And that's why it's so great to see those initiatives that bring researchers and practitioners together,
Right.
create spaces for them to talk, to share ideas, and make sure that the technology being developed actually meets the needs of the people who will be using it.
This has been a really insightful look into those challenges of crowd management.
Thanks.
What about the future, though? Where do we go from here? What can we expect to see in the coming years?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll be discussing in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back, and we've talked about all these challenges in crowd management. We've talked about the research and how important it is for the researchers and the people actually managing these big events to work together.
Absolutely.
But what does the future hold for those huge crowds we see at concerts and festivals and sporting events?
I think the future of crowd management is really exciting. There's so much potential for innovation, and we're already seeing some really cool stuff.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of innovations?
Well, AI is going to be huge. It's going to play an even bigger role than it does now.
Okay.
Remember those computational models we talked about? AI is going to make them even more powerful and more accurate.
So we'll have AI simulations that can predict crowd behavior, like with crazy precision.
Exactly. Imagine simulations that can analyze data from tons of sensors in real time
Okay.
and predict how the crowd's going to move and maybe even identify people who need help.
It's almost like having a virtual guardian angel watching over the crowd.
It is, but it's important to remember that AI isn't just about crunching numbers.
Right.
It can actually learn and adapt as it gets more data.
So it can handle those like unexpected curveballs that always seem to pop up when you have big crowds.
That's the idea, that adaptability is key because crowds are always changing.
Makes sense.
But AI can also help us in other areas.
Oh, like what?
Think about that mining subsystem, the one that sifts through all that data. AI can not only help us analyze it,
Uh-huh.
but it can also help us interpret it, find those subtle patterns that we might miss.
So it's like having an AI detective working alongside the crowd experts.
Yes, constantly looking for clues and trying to anticipate problems before they even happen.
That's amazing.
That partnership between human expertise and AI,
Yeah.
that's what's going to allow us to respond more quickly and effectively to whatever happens.
All of this sounds incredibly promising, but I have to ask,
Yeah.
what about the potential downsides? You know, things like privacy concerns and algorithmic bias.
Those are definitely important concerns, and we need to be very careful about how we develop and use these technologies.
Right, because we don't want to create a future where our every move is being tracked and analyzed and we have no control over it.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right balance, and transparency is super important.
Okay.
People need to know how these systems work, what data is being collected, and how it's being used.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the ethical framework that guides how we use it.
Absolutely. And that's a conversation that we all need to be a part of.
What about the Internet of Things? I've heard a lot about how that's going to change everything.
The Internet of Things is going to have a huge impact on crowd management.
Okay, how so?
Imagine a network of sensors everywhere in a venue,
Okay.
tracking things like temperature, crowd density, noise levels, all that stuff.
So the venue itself becomes like this giant sensor
Hmm.
feeding data into the system.
Exactly. And then think about wearable sensors.
Wearable sensors on people.
Yes, people could choose to wear them, and they could track things like their location and even their vital signs.
You mean like their heart rate and stuff?
Yes, imagine someone starts to feel overwhelmed or anxious in the crowd.
Okay.
Their sensor detects a spike in their heart rate and sends an alert to the crowd management team.
Wow.
They can then step in and offer assistance or guide them to a quieter area.
That's really cool. So it's not just about preventing bad things from happening.
Right.
It's about making sure everyone has a positive experience.
Exactly. That's where the real power of this technology lies.
It's pretty amazing to think about how far we've come from basic crowd control to these really complex systems that use data to keep people safe.
It has been a remarkable journey.
And it sounds like there's still so much more to come.
Absolutely. As we learn more about how crowds behave and as technology keeps advancing, there's no limit to what we can do.
Well, I'm walking away from this conversation feeling really optimistic. There are definitely challenges, but it seems like everyone's committed to finding solutions that prioritize people's safety and well-being.
I agree. The future of crowd management is all about using technology and human ingenuity to make sure people can come together safely and enjoy these shared experiences.
I love that, and that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of crowd management. We'll see you next time.